Hey, what's up, guys? On this episode of Muscle Minds, Dr. Scott has prepared for us a dozen ways to be the best bodybuilder that you can. We're going to get to that right now. You said you've got some thoughts prepared for us today. What are we going to learn from you this morning?
So I just whipped some of this up today. Like I was thinking, well, what are we going to talk about? And like, what's the bottom line is that bodybuilding really, it doesn't have to be rocket science. It's cool to make it into rocket science because then that makes for bodybuilding brain candy, which people like to hear me talk about.
Of course.
All sorts of cool sciencey type shit that they may not understand, but it sounded neat when I talked about it. It's like, wow, that was fascinating. No idea what the fuck he said, and I can't recall it, and I couldn't reiterate it. But I was thinking, like, what are the things that people could, like, in a basic bare bones list, what are the things that people can do to be a better bodybuilder?
Yeah.
And you could clickbait this as to, like, what are the top 10 mistakes that you're making, or something like that. I don't even know what the number is. But so I just started making a list. I did this, like, in the 20 before we started talking this morning.
No kidding.
So yeah. So the first one was, and this is for people that are, to some degree really focused on making progress, probably going to be competitors for the most part, but not necessarily everyone, is to, and this is at the very forefront of my book, is to set achievable, so reasonable and measurable goals and then track progress toward those. So if you want to move up a weight class, and I have a whole section of the book on that, you would need to have some way of tracking your body weight, the relative amount of muscle mass you're gaining, and what that's going to mean when you've stripped all the fat off and you're at 4% body fat on the day of the show.
Yeah.
So let's say you want to be a top of the heavyweight class at 224 pounds at 4% body fat. That's going to give you like about 20 pounds of fat, something like that, if I'm doing that right. Like 10 pounds of fat, roughly. So you better have pretty dang close to like 212, 210, 214 pounds of muscle mass when you're at 4% body fat, if you're going to be at the top of the heavyweight class. So if you start off your off season and you have 186 pounds of fat-free mass, that means you've got a lot, probably an insurmountable amount of muscle mass to gain. That's not a reasonable goal to get there.
Sure. So
you need to be able to track those things, and it's just literally putting a stake post at the end of the direction you want to travel gives you a guiding light, so to speak, to go to. Yeah. And you can measure those things. So that's the thing that so many people don't do. I've run into so many people. They have a nebulous idea of where they want to be, but they don't have any way of tracking that. There's no way of knowing if they're heading in the right direction, per se, because they just sort of like, I want to look like I look really fucking good when I'm naked. I was like, okay, that's awesome. So how much muscle mass do you need to gain in order to look really fucking good? Really fucking good. What does that mean in numerical, in a trackable, measurable way?
Yeah, because that can be different for a lot of people,
Absolutely. Yeah. It might be just you need to drop 20 pounds of body fat. You got plenty of muscle mass. You want to be 180 at 8% and be able to sustain that, which is pretty damn hard to do.
Yeah.
You got to make some pretty large lifestyle accommodations in order to and develop some pretty strong, well-rooted habits that are balanced in something that keeps your brain functioning properly. You get enough pleasure and reward now and again to stay at 8%, over a prolonged period. So what does that mean? So that's the big thing. We can do a whole show on that, and I've got a whole first chapter on setting those goals. But otherwise, like there was a guy I think I mentioned before. He was a phenomenal guy. He's one of the trainers at my gym back in Arizona. And he would, like, about every 6 months, he'd say, hey, Scott, I need to talk to you. And this is over the course of, like, 4 years. He's like, I want to do this, that, and the other, and I want to get bigger calves, or think I really want to get big now. I'm like, how big do you want to get? He's like, I don't know. I said, well, let me know. And by the end of all these conversations, I'm like, you just figure out how big you want to go, and then we can plan a route there. So otherwise, and I always point out to the large parking lot in the mall complex we're in, otherwise, it's like you walking out there and thinking you want something to eat, but you don't know what you want, so you start heading towards the bakery, and then you start heading towards the Chinese place, and you're just wandering around the parking lot.
Yeah.
You don't really know what you want because you don't know. You just want food, but you can't decide what kind you want. Like,
Yeah.
do you want to be really fucking big, like gigantic, like you want to like follow Jordan Peters' path? That you have to track things and pay attention. And so many people will do that. So that's why people will they'll gain for a while and they'll diet back down and they'll reverse gears and lose everything they just gained, because they don't realize that, well, shit, I was going in the right direction and I was 75% of the way there, because they don't have a there.
Yeah.
They don't have a goal. And they're just like, well, I don't like how fat I feel right now and I want to get this fat off. So they diet back down, and not knowing that, you know what? Okay, at the rate I'm going, I went for 6 months, probably have another 6 months. Could I handle getting another 5 pounds of body fat on? Would that be tolerable? Because in that 6 months, I can probably get the muscle mass that I want.
Yeah.
Because that's my goal. And then I can diet down and keep as much of that. And because they planned it all out, they've got a path there. But without the path, it's kind of like, it's like going out and you're like, you don't even look at the map and you don't know where you're going. You're on the path and all of a sudden you're like, ah, shit, I'm too far away from home. And you turn around. Little do you know, if you'd seen yourself on the map, you're like, I only had to take 2 more turns and I would have been at the other end.
Yeah.
Everything that was Valhalla right there at the end. I didn't know it because I didn't have a goal.
Yeah.
That's huge. So there's also I just kind of titled like a section, the Tao of Training.
Mm.
So Lao Tzu is sort of the one of the most renowned Oriental Asian authors focused on Taoism.
Yeah.
Which is basically sort of finding a middle way. And the idea of not going too overly extreme and in either particular direction, finding sort of a middle ground. And it's funny because, and this occurred to me while I was sort of writing these things, is I've talked so much about hormesis before in the context of bodybuilding. And that literally is finding an optimization, finding a middle way. You don't train too much volume so that you can't recover, but you don't undertrain as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough balance to find, and I never really thought about it, but it directly does relate to Taoism. I like that.
Yeah, so one aspect of finding that middle way in bodybuilding, which can mean success, is finding some way to incorporate progressive overload.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
and this is a huge question right now. I got to tell you, we have so many people right now that have been getting pumped up listening to Ron and Dusty talk on their new show. It's Just Bodybuilding. There's so many people that are moving toward more progressive overload. Like they're really connecting with it. People who haven't done it in the past. And I'm afraid for some of them because you got to figure out, like you're saying, this middle ground. It could be a really dangerous way of training if you don't recognize, it's like John Meadows said, which this episode's coming out real soon. He was like that you can't just keep progressing and progressing and progressing. At some point, it's got to stop. Like it's not just a straight line up. If it was, we'd all be benching 1,000 pounds by now.
There's an asymptote that you read. There's a law of diminishing returns, of course, to some degree.
So I'm all for it, but I want people to go into it armed with what you're getting at right now.
Yeah, it was actually you've actually sort of segued into the next thing I'm going to talk about, but these two fit together. So as far as incorporating the progressive overload, some people just like at one end of that spectrum is DC training. Okay. Right? It's logbook, beat the fucking logbook every time you go.
Yeah.
Every aspect of every set is to failure.
Yeah.
Right? Your straight sets are to failure, your Widowmakers are to failure, each step of your rest pause sets are to failure. Everything is failure. Everything's try to beat what you did previously. And I mean, because of the effort level, that obviously mandates a lower training volume that fits within the confines of how Dante constructed DC training. That's for people who just who have a Jordan or a Dusty, a Ron, like that kind of a mentality, who love that. I love that kind of training.
Yeah.
But that doesn't fit everyone else. Some people just like that, they dread that. So I think there was in one of Jordan's, it may have been on the podcast with Ron and Dusty, Jordan talked about training with SUCESS initially.
We talked about that on this show too.
We did, yeah. And SUCESS it just robbed him of the joy of training.
Yeah.
So some people, like, they would just rather go and they want to go in and get a pump and kind of like wing it and what have you. And that doesn't incorporate a progressive overload. So some people will, by their nature, sort of almost unconsciously try to move the weights up and try to do better what they did before to some degree. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's funny because the idea of progressive overload is that some people say, well, it's a matter of pushing the loads and the training weights to create the stimulus in the gym. And the flip side of that is that if you have previously created the appropriate stimulus and you've adapted accordingly, then you should and would be able to get more reps with the same weight or use a higher weight for more reps or both.
Yeah. Okay.
So does the progressive overload occur with the training, or does it manifest in the gym as you're able to do more?
Okay. Yeah.
And some people are really well gifted in the sense that they can go into the gym and maybe they subconsciously will tend to move things forward and they adapt real well.
Yeah.
So they come in and, like, just because of the nature of their genetics, they adapt getting 2 more reps with a given load every time they go in the gym for many years, perhaps even, or especially when they start off training. It's nothing. That's just easy for them. So those folks, and a lot of pros are like that. The most gifted people we know, many of them don't use logbooks. But I think aside from those folks, and of course, Ron and Dusty are pros too, and Jordan's a pretty big guy.
Yeah.
And of course, if you have a bad memory, it's nice to have a logbook. Finding the amount of progressive overload that fits with your mentality that's tolerable for you and fun.
Yeah, yeah.
What I did I can't remember, like I was doing this 30 years ago, before DC training when I was just started off and I use this with clients when I was training in gyms and that sort of thing is pick on one end of the spectrum of progressive, let's just simply pick like those 6 to 8 big core movements that you use on a regular basis in your training, whatever your split is, whatever your regime is, and have kind of a test, or it's at the beginning of the workout when you're fresh, but it's what John Meadows might call kind of a challenge set.
Okay.
So like this might be bent over rows, an incline barbell press, a squat, could be a leg press, a rack dead. You might have an overhead press movement in there, something where the form is pretty much set. You've learned the motor pattern, you got the skill down for the exercise, and you just make that your first exercise of your training session. So you're training back, you're going to do rack deads, and let's say rack deads and bent over rows, or just even one of those are what you use as your sort of test to see if you're making progress. So every 2 weeks or every time you come around to that exercise, you would say, okay, now it's time to see what I can get. And if you did 405 for 10, now you try to get 12. And then once you're able to get more than 12, then you start using a higher weight and hopefully something you can get in the 8 to 12 range. When you get 8 reps with 435 and et cetera, you start keep progressively moving your way up. But you're only doing that like maybe once every other workout for one set after you've warmed up properly. It's one failure set as sort of a testing, proving set for yourself. So that that tells you whether you're making that adaptation. And it also sets in your mind a recognition of how strong you actually are.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, imagine you went for months and you never did an all-out set like that. You didn't recognize, you weren't getting, this constant reminder from your logbook, like, shit, 6 months ago I was doing 405 and now I'm doing 455.
Yeah.
Same number of reps. That's pretty cool. So knowing that, then you just gauge you can say, well, I shouldn't be using 365 for these sets of 12 now.
Yeah.
Using 385 or something else. And so every other day, so you're just doing that once in a while. You've got kind of like I got it one set to get through and test myself and really push. And the rest of it is the training that I enjoy and that I love. And it might be completely, quote unquote, leader style, instinctive, do whatever you want to do on that particular day.
Yeah.
Then you've got that marker of progressive overload. So having something in there either to like literally just tell you that you are adapting and progressing and getting stronger.
Yeah.
In the hypertrophy specific rep range, so to speak, 8+ or 6+, or something that drives you as well. So like, okay, here's my challenge. Can I get more reps on this rack dead than I did last time? But it's not overwhelming. It's not like, oh shit, every fucking set is going to be a blood, out of my nose, like shit myself grinder set where I feel like I'm going to die.
Yeah.
That's just story. But you can go in between. And what I've done with fortitude training, for instance, is a middle ground. One way of setting up a middle ground, the loading sets are very progressive overload oriented. The muscle rounds are somewhat, you still want to kind of beat what you've done before. And then the pump sets are mind muscle connection, higher rep, go for the pump, enjoy the exercise, kind of hard training.
Yeah.
More kind of like wing it, go for it types of things. And that's, people like that. It's like, because you're not every set, you're going to get a nice reward, you get a nice pump, on the days you did the heavy loading sets. The other exercises are done with pump sets.
Yeah, it's a little less. It's a little less like emotionally or mentally straining for someone that doesn't want to follow that logbook constantly. Where the middle ground that I found, Scott, is that I will log some key lifts and that I try to beat those. Like, we've talked about my incline dumbbell presses, and that's an exercise that I'm feeling comfortable with and stronger with. And I'm trying to beat that, It's not always for me, like we talked about before. At this point, I'm still stuck with the 110s, but I'm working on just getting better form on each set and trying to beat the reps. But it's really, at this point, man, I'm just trying to work on getting better form every set and better control every set. But that's one where I will really pay attention to where I'm at with that. And then the next exercise may have some variation depending on how I feel after I'm done with that. Maybe I still feel strong and I can still push hard, and I'll be intuitive and try to, really go as heavy as I can, but it's not something that I'm consistently tracking the way I am with that meat and potatoes exercise.
Yes. And that is another way of reiterating what you sort of foreshadowed. And that's this idea of train hard, but also train smart. So training smart is not trying to get more reps by being sloppy and losing your form and mind muscle connection. So the progression has to occur when everything else is equal in terms of the mind muscle connection, the form, the body English that you may or may not be using at all on a given exercise. And in the large scheme of things, some people like, and this goes back to the way that a lot of people are trying to structure the training programs these days, and is to do a number of sets that are like have reps in reserve, like so not everything's to failure. So, and there's a large, I think why some people kind of like that, because the inroads into recovery, so to speak, that come with those last few reps before you get to the end of the set, which we talked about ad nauseum, is greater. But also, I think the psychological stress that comes along with that, and the pain and the misery, like those are the ones that are really testers and really hard. Those take a lot out of you in terms of your motivation. For some people. So it's much less daunting to know you're going to do like literally 10 sets with 3 reps in reserve. Than 2 sets that are everything you can possibly get. Especially because there's looming in that 2 sets with everything you can get that you might not progress. You might not, like that.
You may fail. Like, you may fail. You're saying
you may fail to progress, and so you have to get up for those. And getting up for those, so to speak, month after month, year after year, is not something that a challenge that many people relish. So
that's such that's such an interesting perspective that I hadn't thought about before. Doing something new, I think, in general in life, that's something I've learned in my own life, and this is way outside of bodybuilding, every aspect of it. Doing something new is scary because there's a chance that you might not succeed at it. And every time you step in the gym with progressive overload, you have a chance of not succeeding. And that can be scary. And I hadn't made that connection about why it can be more mentally taxing, but you make a great point. You make a really good point. I hadn't, exactly. Fear of failure. And I never made that connection, which seems so obvious now that we're talking about it, until right now, like this second.
I'm gonna get back and get really kind of quote unquote deep here for a second, but
I knew I might trigger you once I said that. We can get Scott off on tangents.
So a lot of people say that hate is the opposite of love.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah,
but I think fear is really the opposite of love.
Sure, I could see that.
Fear is the complete aversion to something. Like it's like you just want to get away from it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you love something, you just want to take it into you as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And some people say they have a love-hate relationship with the weights, but it can be more so even a love-fear relationship with the weights. Because if you're of a Jordan mindset, you love that challenge.
Yeah.
You love and you relish that, like this is an opportunity to just express the core essence of who I am in a very pure struggle, you versus gravity. Whereas the opposite of that is being afraid of losing, of being beaten, of somehow being subjugated by your inability to rise to the challenge.
Yeah.
And that's the opposite. So fear does not behoove you when you're going into the weight room. You don't want to be scared of the weight. And people, it's nice to be a little bit afraid, like of that big weight,
Yeah, respect it, right? But
yeah, definitely respect it. But like in people who've lifted like done really big, heavy, like bone crushing, like level, like 5-6 plate squats and those sorts of things. You get into that weight, and you got to know that shit is going to get owned. You have to be solid in your perspective.
Yeah.
And actually, Jordan he just posted a video of him squatting, where he's just screaming. The obscenities are flying like a motherfucker. And he really says that. And then in his text he says yes. That's his mantra. And Bev Francis used to have one. She said this in a video interview I saw of her, where she used to say strong.
Yeah.
She would reiterate that in her head. And it's like you get into that spot where you are the epitome of your willpower and your ability to dominate your situation in that moment.
Yes.
And at least, worst case scenario, you don't get the lift, or at least you still are in the right mentality, probably to do that, get to that failure point much more safely. Because the worst thing you want to do is get into that weight. And you've probably done this, and it's happened to me. It's been a long while now, and I always avoid this, but I can still remember it. You get on the weight, and you're like, "Oh fuck!" Like it surprises you. And you're like, "Oh shit!" And
I've been there.
I've seen that in the gym with people where they're like, "Oh fuck!" They're like, they don't know what to do. They're scared.
Yeah.
They're fearful. That's not where you want to be. With
God,
the
no.
No. Like that's like, put that shit down. I have a funny story maybe I can tell at the end about that. What I saw a guy do. So, but training in the context of the progressive overload and training hard as you possibly can, some people love that sort of thing, and some people, they like it now and again. There's variation there. So the part of you want to train as hard as you're willing to and as sustainable, because you only make progress if you sustain the effort over longer periods of time.
Right.
But you have to train smart too. So don't be if you like progressive overload, don't be an idiot and just let your form go all to hell so you can get a couple more reps. Because you didn't really progressively overload. All you did was change your form, so you moved the bar up and down a couple more times.
Right.
What you write down doesn't really suggest that you actually adapted or you were stronger. You just did something different. And then adjust based on the level of effort and your recovery ability, your training volume and or your frequency to match around that. And this is probably you could say this is the core of my thoughts on training is you want to be able to, the essence of why resistance exercise is such a good stimulus for muscle growth is because the efforts and the loads are so tremendous, and the metabolic stress, everything about the stimulus is presented is extraordinary compared to something you ever would do in a normal day-to-day life. Nothing is remotely close for most people, unless they work like a crazy heavy construction job every once in a while. But they would just be it's one lift for maybe 5 seconds or something like that.
Right.
Not like a full weight training workout. So train as hard as you can. So make use of that, the epitome of the weight training and the resistance exercise stimulus by training as hard as you can, given your psychological propensities to do lots of sets to failure or not so many, but train smart and recognize that how hard you're training is going to dictate how well you recover, and that's going to dictate your volume and how frequently you can come back and do it again. So you got to be kind of an animal to the extent you want to be an animal.
Yeah.
And if you're a full blown crazy animal who likes DC training, then you're not going to be able to get away with 20 sets per muscle group per training session twice a week or something like that. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And someone asked me, it was funny because it was a facetious comment, but someone asked me, it's like, so, if you have to do 8 sets per muscle group twice a week, if that's sort of optimal for muscle growth, then how come so many people grow so well from DC training? And And I'm like, well, I've talked about this before, because those people are training a lot harder, I suspect, than what you see in the average of those studies that give us those guidelines based on the meta-analytical analyses that have been done, suggesting higher volume is better, blah, blah, blah. People just don't train like they do who do DC training and make good progress. So that's train as hard as you can, but be smart about it at the same time in terms of your form and how you construct your volume and frequency, etc.
I like that. Hey, before you jump into the next one, instead of running a commercial now for our sponsor, True Nutrition, I thought I'd just give them a brief, just a mention on the show. And so in that case, I'm a little bit rusty at this since this is something new. But I figured, though, I'd stop us where we're at just to give a shout out to TrueNutrition.com and to encourage you guys to shop with them. If you guys are pushing hard, if you're doing the stuff that Scott's talking about, then you're going to want to invest in high quality supplements. We all stand behind TrueNutrition.com. Tons of variety of great proteins, tons of flavor. I think there's a flavor for everyone, basically. Not to mention pre and intra workout products. They've got various different amino acids, health supplements, and a lot more. So thank you, True Nutrition, for sponsoring us. And guys, you can use our code ADVICES for some savings. How'd that go, Scott?
That's good, man. Yeah. All right. I just used some True Nutrition hydrolyzed whey in my. Today I had some chocolate frosted flakes.
Nice.
The box is empty.
Nice. But don't let me derail you, though. Let's keep this Let's keep this train on the tracks. This is great stuff.
So this is the other thing here is, don't be married to movements that don't work for you.
Yeah.
It's a big one. It's kind of an obvious one. So people, like, for so long, I squatted for years and years and years, and I never got my quads to grow. It's like, well, you're not built for that, so to speak. The anatomy and the architecture of your pelvis is not set up for you to someone who's going to get a lot out of squatting in terms of stimulating the quad. So don't do that. And I was thinking about he started to get some tears there at the end, but Marcus Rule had one of the best chests of all time. If you look at, Marcus Rule's chest was just ridiculous. And I think it was Made in Germany is the video where he's training, and this is with his old ex-girlfriend who's also a competitor. And one of the things he did, a couple things in there, he did like really heavy cross cable pec flies.
Okay.
And so people are like, well, no, that's a
finishing move.
Finishing, yeah, that's just like a burnout movement, something like that. No, Marcus is using those as a building movement, so to speak. He's training really, really hard. And he also did super wide incline Smith presses.
Okay.
So some people go so far as the Smith machine's just it's useless. Well, I totally disagree with that, but he goes really, really wide.
Yeah.
So that just popped in my head as someone with a really, really impressive muscle group, which I presume he built. I mean, he may have been gifted in that department as well, so it's hard to always tease that apart.
Sure.
But he was using non-conventional exercises. So he was using the ones that he found fit for him.
That's so important. It's so important. It's I think it takes time to figure that. Well, it takes time, I think, like you said, squatting. It takes time to figure out that the squats aren't building your legs. You know what I mean? You have to still try it.
I think so, absolutely. Like those core basics are considered that for a reason. So give them a go. Like I squatted for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And then I'm pretty sure that I can do something different to make my legs grow better. But Smith machines work great. When I put the top squat on a Smith machine, I can do that.
Okay.
Because it gives me the stability to be able to drive in the plane and with the biomechanics that activate my quads the way I want. I also get some glutes and hamstrings too, but it feels totally different than a barbell squat.
Okay, I'm thinking of a question that I could see listeners asking right here. So how long should somebody squat for? We'll just say squats, for instance. How long should somebody do that exercise? They get in the gym, they're new, they're training. We assume that they've been taught proper form and that they're squatting to. Like for me, squats didn't grow my quads until I changed to my stance, and I had to do a bunch of funky stuff to it, and then it became a great quad growth exercise. But how long should someone give it a try before they decide to potentially go a different direction or make modifications?
So that's one of my other points that's down low on the list, but I'll bring it up now. Okay. And it's super important for this. So if after the first probably 2 years of training, like you can just kind of grow regardless of even doing much with your diet. Like that's why untrained individuals are so easy to study, because you get such a good effect from the intervention of of resistance exercise, that it gives you statistical power, and you can see if potentially if there's a difference.
Yeah.
You also run into the ceiling effect. They're growing so fast that it doesn't matter what you do. They're just kind of at max rate of growth because the stimulus is so novel. But once you're past, 2 or 3 years, or maybe just 2 years of training, a lot of people will say, hey, I want to bring my arms up. This is the question I've gotten, I don't know how many dozens upon dozens of times on my board. And I have a YouTube video as well that maybe we can link about how to bring up a muscle group. And Dante used to say this all the time as well. One of the important things to think about when evaluating an exercise in terms of its effect on growth in particular, just in the big picture, is, are you also gaining weight? So yes, you can just get some arm size when you're not really gaining a lot of weight because the stimulus is so novel. But with weight training, at least, you're going to have to be gaining weight overall. So if let's say you've trained squats for 3 years,
yeah,
and in those 3 years you've gained about 30 pounds, and you haven't seen any growth in your quads, probably not. Everything else is growing but your quads, and you've been focusing on squats as an exercise for your quads. Probably trying to do something different.
Okay.
But if you've, over those 3 years, have been squatting and squatting and squatting, and maybe getting stronger on squats, and you haven't gained any weight, why would you expect that your quads would just kind of magically grow? Because you've already gotten a large amount of your growth in the first couple of years. I mean, literally in the first 3 to 5 years, most people have at least probably 3/4 of the muscle growth they'll get if they're doing everything right. So it's all contextual. If you've been kind of futzing around in the gym and haven't really training and sticking to a diet that gives you an excess of calories to create growth, then who knows? But if you're doing everything right and you're gaining weight and the exercise is not producing growth, and you're not feeling sore, if you do a good amount of it, you can't feel the soreness in the exercise the next day to some degree, or you're not getting a good pump in that muscle group. Those are the 3 big signs. You don't feel it while you train, you don't feel it right after you train, and you don't see it over the long haul in terms of adaptation. If those 3 things are missing, and you're gaining weight, then you probably have a bad exercise selection.
Okay, that makes sense.
It could just be that muscle group just doesn't want to grow.
Yeah.
Chances are you can do something different.
That makes sense. I think those are good tools there to look at. Then thank you.
Yeah, and that's real simple. I mean, really, everyone. It's funny because you're listening to me like, I knew that, and most listeners are like, I knew that. Obviously, you do an exercise, it's supposed to be for your quads. You don't feel it in your quads. Oh, the mind muscle connection sucks. Or the exercise because it's squats, and you just have to be in a certain biomechanical position with the bar on your back in that way in order to do the movement. Yeah. Based on your skeletal architecture, it just may not activate the quads very well.
I think though,
go ahead.
So much of it is like, it's going to take time. And so much of bodybuilding is, I think, delaying the gratification and just going through the motions, that it can be easy to overlook some of these things that do, when we talk about it, it sounds really basic and very fundamental. And that, if you're not feeling sore in the muscle, then it's probably not growing, that sounds logical. But when you're in the trenches, you know what I mean, and you're actually training, it can be easier to overlook that stuff when you're just going through the day to day, and that you are getting, as you've said before, you may be getting some rewards from a training system that isn't necessarily the best training system for you, because you know what you can get out of it. You know that you can feel good when you're done training. You maybe have made some sort of other accomplishments with it, and that you walk out of the gym having felt successful. It can be easy to keep doing those same things without necessarily activating the muscle as well as you could have, So I get both sides of it. I really do, I mean, I got to where, I got pretty strong on squats. I got to where I think I was able to do, and these were probably in between like 9 degrees at the knee and full parallel. Okay. This wasn't like competition level. Yeah. But it wasn't. They weren't high, but they were where I felt there's a nice depth for activating it on my legs just in general, or so it felt. And I was able to do like
at like 585 for 8 to 10.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I was heavier probably then than I am now, but I got to where I was just like, I'm going to fucking dominate this exercise. And it still didn't end up panning out all that well for my quads. It just didn't.
I've seen that in people. I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at, Johnny Jackson, very strong squatter. You look at Stan Efferding, world's strongest powerlifter, world's strongest bodybuilder, don't have great legs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, both of those, I know at least Stan would, when he wanted muscle mass, and the thing about squats is it lends itself to wanting to lift really, really heavy weights.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, I mean, it's hard to do Widowmakers on squats too. That's why Dante has them in there. But, Stan would switch to a very different type of training regime when he was training for bodybuilding versus powerlifting, because he knew that was the way to put on muscle mass. And the muscle mass wasn't really a limiting factor for his strength as a powerlifter, at least.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's the main thing that really is that so many people are not, after the first couple of years of training where you can do that, you can't really expect to make gains in a particular muscle unless you're growing everywhere. And you can bring up weak muscle groups, but you're going to some degree, become a larger version of yourself in terms of your symmetry and your balance. But it's only going to happen if you are becoming a larger version of yourself everywhere. So, and you hope at least, that those lagging muscle groups, the weaker ones, will maybe grow at least in proportion and maybe better, if you focus on them. And I've got the whole video on some approaches that can be done for that. But
we'll link that video on your YouTube. We'll link that in the description, guys. So look below and you can check that out.
So another big one is making training, diet, and recovery number one, as opposed to supplements and gear.
Okay, fair enough.
You see a lot of people, because I mean the thing is with gear, I mean as people say, it's icing on the cake. I've heard people go back and forth like it really doesn't matter that much, and you can get really strong as a natural. Some people can. Some people, there's varying degrees of responsiveness, but that's kind of a known quantity.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different effects of different steroids, and people will get very sort of even transfixed on the idea of finding like the perfect stack or the perfect particular steroid that works for them. And there's definitely something to be had in those choices. Obviously, Trenbolone is different than Primo, or Equipoise or what have you. But those pieces are kind of laid out for you to some degree, and you can mix and match and you can add. That's an easy thing that can be done literally at any time.
Okay.
That's the easy part of the recipe. You just sort of sprinkle those in if you decide you're going to go that route as an enhanced athlete. But the training and the diet and recovery is the hard part. That's the part that I think it's nice to fall in love with if you possibly can, because that's kind of how I am. That's how I think people are successful, is they really enjoy living a lifestyle, so to speak. But you can totally fuck up your training. Like literally, I mean, I didn't think about this when I composed this list today, but imagine like the effort level in just doing injections every single day versus going to the gym 4 times a week.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, if you just like, it's nothing to do injections. It's like, you're cleaning your bathroom.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. Maybe you don't like needles or whatever, but most people, that's nothing. Like don't worry so much about that. That's an easy one. The thing you need to focus on, probably more so than anything, is your training.
Everything else. Yeah.
Yeah. And finding all these other things. So that's just kind of a general thought. And I think that people vary in terms of why they will put focus there. There's a magical quality to gear. People know that steroids work.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, it's a magic bullet that I can find.
And I think too, people have a lot of faith in that stuff. They put a lot of faith in it that they go onto a message board or a website, and that they read a description, and that they say that if you take this, it will produce this, and this effect.
Black and white.
It is. And I think that people look at that and then they put faith in that. And we do that, I think, as a society in general. We put faith in drugs, faith in medications, that this does this to achieve this thing, that this is what it takes. And I can even say, I've had that thought in my own head that, at one point I thought to myself early on, like, well, guys like John Meadows must be doing something more. You know, there must be like a special, I don't know, a special IGF protocol that he uses that I don't know about yet, type thing. You know, and it turns out that realistically, none of those things do this, and this. In general, they all kind of do similar things, more or less. It's not nearly as black and white as I once thought it was. And yeah, without the other things, everything we've talked about up to this point, then it won't really do anything.
Yeah. And there's variable responsiveness to gear. Like some people do better than others. But that's not something you can really, there's a dose response, and it's kind of to some degree set in stone with you.
Yeah.
Like that's just kind of either you respond really well or you don't. And you can figure that out pretty quickly and easily, and then that question's answered. Yeah. Whereas figuring out the training equation for people can take a long, long time. And that can be very, very important, much more important, I think, than people find. And that's exactly why you said, you know what the gear does? It does this. It's inject and then watch the growth happen. It happens pretty rapidly in many people.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinary. Whereas training is an immediate gratification, unless you like the training. But the growth comes a lot more slowly.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's I think a bigger part of the equation than most people see now. It's not as sexy to talk about training because it's not something people want to do.
I think it's getting more popular, though. I think that I don't know if it's just my own slant, my own, my own personal interest, but I feel like there are more and more people that are shifting toward it. There used to be 10 years ago a larger draw to like what you could do chemically, where I do think that people are seeing now that everybody's chemicaled themselves to the max, and that we have guys that are under 200 pounds that are on 5 grams and they still are under 200 pounds, but then we see guys that the difference makers, and those are the people that have the training, that know how to be intense, that know how to push and know how to grow,
that's a good point there. I think, the internet is made it such that anyone can kind of, be a guru to a certain degree, as long as you have enough bravado and enough,
big words.
Big words, yeah. No, not even big words. You're just sure about what you're saying. Like you remember.
But the big words help.
Yeah. What was the guy's name? The guy who was a fake guru, and he. I don't think he actually was. He wrote as if he was from maybe Latin America or Mexico.
Oh, are you talking about GH15?
GH15. Yeah, I was thinking GH. Yeah, the GH15 guy
in Salona.
So, Trenbolone and testosterone and like all these things, and he typed with broken English.
Yeah.
But he said, this is what these pros take. This is black and white. This is what you have to do. The whole idea of GH15 is that you need to use at least 15 IUs of GH a day.
He probably was selling this stuff.
He eventually sold the stuff. Yeah. He had a whole website where he sold this stuff. But it was that way in which he just told you he told people what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And so years ago, it's like, if you want to grow, you have to use lots of gear because all the pros use lots of gear. But now enough people, I think, are figuring out, this is what I think what you were saying there, is that now people are figuring out, there's enough people who have done that and tried that. It's like, you know what? I'm using all the gear and I'm not getting all the gains.
Yeah.
There's something missing, It's not just the gear. And that's good. That's a good thing, So the worldwide online bodybuilding community experiment is now yielding results in terms of people saying, you know what? One above 3 grams a week, and it's not doing me any good. I just feel like shit,
right,
or what have you. So, anyway, that was a big point. And then auto-regulating. This is about sort of the Tao of training.
Yes.
Auto-regulating your deloads, your exercise selection, etc. And this kind of pulls it all together. Like, you got to know when to step back and stop being. It's an extreme endeavor. But you also need to be able to pull back. You need to train as hard as you're willing to train, but not any harder because it's not sustainable. Train as hard as you can for as long as you can until it's time to deload, and then step back, because you don't grow in the gym. You grow when you recover from what you did in the gym. You take exercise selection, auto-regulate that. If you keep on doing squats and your back is getting worse and worse, your knees are getting worse and worse, then stop doing squats. That's not sustainable. That's not going to get you where you want to go over the next 2 years, because eventually you're going to grind your joints to a halt. So being able to just find that sort of middle ground, of pulling back when you need to, training smart, and training hard at the same time. So that was an important part.
Nice.
I see you smiling there. Did someone post something funny?
We just had, Nicholas said, I feel smarter already. He posted that right at the start of our show.
Good.
Yeah. But a few people were just saying, hey, so I just, it always makes me happy when I see when we, guys, anybody who's watching the recorded version, if you didn't know, we record this live, and we've been doing that over at the Advices Radio Facebook page. So every other Monday at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, you can find Dr. Scott and I here on opposite weeks, Sunday nights, Blood, Sweat, and Gear with Skip and S2H.
Yes.
And we do that. It's like a nighttime show. People watch that while they're prepping their foods and stuff for the next day. Man, that was good stuff, Scott. There's more. I thought there was it.
Oh yeah, no. I
then please.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is sort of couched in the name of the book, to Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, which is Be Your Own Buddha, so to speak, which is find your own way, and it's connected with a phenomenal book. It's a classic, cult classic almost, you might say, written by Robert Pirsig, called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
That was a good book. That made me want to get a motorcycle after reading that.
Yeah. That's probably why I have one. So in that book, he talks about, like, at one point in time, he's on a trip. There's a lot of great notions in the book. He's on a trip with a couple, and they are on their bike. They're riding together, and they just want to get away from society and get out to nature and all those sorts of things, and just kind of escape. Right. They just want, like, this end point of, like, not having any responsibilities and being able to, like, be free of the drudgery of the rat race. And that is the notion that he sort of develops, is that, like, the way to be free of those things that you feel hold you down is to be as connected with the nature of reality and nature literally as it surrounds you as you possibly can. And therein comes the maintenance of the motorcycle. So this couple, their bike breaks down.
Yeah.
And they're like, fuck, they're all pissed off. They're like, they don't know how to fix it. They have no idea. And I think he even knew at the time it was something very simple, but it just ruins their day. It's like, my bike's supposed to work. It's supposed to be easy, as opposed to, like, being connected with the whole process of, here I am, and I'm traveling with this literally miracle of modern technology that allows me to move at 80, 90 miles an hour on the highway if I like, and climb mountains and do all the extraordinary things. But I'm rejecting that thing that is giving me this potential for liberation. Yeah. I should be bringing all these things into my life. And then I can, when the motorcycle isn't happy, I can work with it, fix it, and then we can continue. So I'm connected to reality in that way. So continue to reject reality is basically the epitome of being unhappy. You're not living in the present moment. So they're rejecting things, whereas he's found the Zen and the art of maintaining his motorcycle. So he knows the motorcycle needs to have an oil change every 2 months, given the number of miles he's doing. He knows it needs new oil. He knows he needs to check these things on the maintenance schedule, and there may be some particular things about his bike that he's figured out that he needs to do. Yeah. And I think that can be applied for people who really want to make progress in the long haul. If this is their inclination, not everyone is going to be philosophically aligned with this idea, but this is the idea of my book, is that you can be very tightly and intimately connected with the Zen and the art of bodybuilding, so to speak, and become a student of bodybuilding. So you start to figure out, and most people are listening. I'm preaching to the choir here, but people who listen to this podcast are probably already doing that. And this isn't in any way to say that my way is the only way, and other ways should take the highway, but is that some people, the people who take the approach of, I just want a coach to tell me what to do so I don't have to think, and I can just kind of go through things mindlessly, disconnected.
Right.
So that I can, like, I don't want to have to maintain my motorcycle. I just want to be able to ride. I just want to be able to get up on stage and look great and win trophies. And I don't want to have any other personal involvement in the endeavor. That creates kind of an automatic disconnect with the activity that I think is the large part of what can be rewarding about the activity, is being connected to it. And it also doesn't make for sustainable progress. I mean, coaches are pricey.
Sure.
And so are you going to have I know people, there are people who've done this. I've had clients, and I've had known trainers who've had clients for like 20 years who come in, and those coaches create accountability, or those trainers create accountability, and they come in and they count the reps for them, they go through the things, and they kind of dislike the whole exercise, but they do it 3 times a week because, they pay the person, and it's not really something that probably gives a whole lot of life to their lives, so much. They may enjoy the conversation, but imagine the scenario where they, what? I am in charge of my own destiny, and I'm going to do this because I think it's the thing to do, and I don't need to pay anybody, and I'm going to go for the ride, and be able to adjust things. If I don't feel like training hard that day, I don't need a trainer to tell me that. I can maintain my own training status by being deeply and intimately involved with this aspect of the endeavor of bodybuilding. I am the bodybuilder. I'm not being told how to bodybuild. Yeah. It is part of who I am. And I am the artist that's creating my bodybuilding endeavor on a daily basis. So that's I think a way that I think is to sort of enjoy the journey and not be so focused on the end point.
Sure.
Because eventually those endpoints, they're few and far between.
And they're not nearly as rewarding sometimes as we think. You get on stage, and first time I got on stage, it was such a short experience compared to, I hadn't thought about it really. I hadn't thought about, all the work you put in to literally be up there for a couple minutes, and that's it, and you're done.
Yeah.
And then what?
Yeah, right. Exactly. And that's the thing. Like if you pay for a coach and, you go all the way through, and you're just thinking and hoping I'm going to win. Mm-hmm. So then I have this trophy, and then everyone knows that I'm, Mr. Utah or Mr. New Zealand or whatever it may be. That can carry you a little bit, but then how do you recreate that on your own? You have to pay a coach. You're completely dependent upon something to some degree. You can't maintain your own motorcycle, so to speak, and you get frustrated when it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So I think there's just a lot of advantages for just being a student of the game, so to speak.
Absolutely.
To the degree you possibly can. Not everyone can do that, but that's something just because of the environment. I've talked about this so many times, just the nature of the culture now. Everyone seems to think they have to have a coach.
Yeah.
I think the best coaches are educators and teachers, and they teach you how to do it on your own.
Yes.
So they launch you off, they kick you out of the nest at some point in time.
Yeah. I want people to understand too, as a coach, I want clients to understand what we're doing, in part to educate them, but in part to get them on board. You know what I mean? I want people to be on board with what we're doing, and I want them to see the results of what we're doing so that it'll continually it feeds into the success. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So for me, it's an important part of the way I coach to help people understand why we are doing, what we're doing. But yeah, I've in the past, my first coach, he was a great guy, and he really did help me get into some really good shape. And I learned a ton from him just through going through the experience. But the answer was more or less like, you do it because I said so.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And the thing is, like a lot of times people will ask questions, and I'll just say, well, what do you think? And they're like, oh, I think probably should do this. I'm like, and that's what you expected me to say. You just didn't have the security stand by your own answer, which you already knew.
Yeah.
And you're good to go, bud. You don't need me to tell you anything. You just need more confidence in what you already know.
I like that, yeah.
And I tell that, like, I don't really do, like, I haven't been taking on clients for, like, regular coaching, like regular check-ins. Instead, I do phone consultations. And I might, so you can do as many of those as you want, but they usually end up being, like, once every 3 weeks, once a month, something like that.
Yeah.
So, because most of those consultations, like, a lot of the check-ins are, like, it's the same thing. If you've been working with somebody for a couple of years, like they know the method that you're using to change their diet.
Yeah.
I have a certain way that I would do that with people. It's all in the book, and they know that. There's like it's just like they're paying, whatever it might be, $50 or $100 a week for you to tell them what they could have already guessed at with 90% accuracy. So there's nothing new.
Yeah.
Whereas if you check in every month, and like to go along, they're like 3 months in or 3 weeks into that. After the last check-in, sorry, not a check-in, but a consult, and they're like, I wonder about this. Well, shit, if I'm going to ask Scott, I'll have to set up a consult with him, In the meantime, they have a few days to think about it, and they come up with the answer on their own.
That's interesting. That's cool.
Almost every time. So eventually there's a buildup of really good questions.
Yeah.
That are true questions that they really can't answer.
Yeah, yeah.
Then it's best. Then we can really have a fruitful conversation, and it's worth their while. And on the average, instead of paying $400 a month or whatever it would be for regular training, they pay $100 an hour for a consult that's once every month.
Yeah.
And paying definitely less than half what they would, and they're getting much more value, and they're becoming much more knowledgeable and confident in themselves because of the nature of the interaction. It forces them, to be self-reliant.
I like that. And I do with the people that I've worked with longer term, I will ask them, well, what do you think about this? Not only am I also, sometimes it's because I genuinely am curious. I figure to myself that, well, you've been doing this a long time. You may have some insight into your body that I didn't. So there's that aspect too. It's kind of more of a collaborative ask, but yeah, I think that I think I'm going to try to work that in intentionally a little more often. Mm-hmm. I like that idea.
If you've got a good rapport with someone, you can literally say, like, sort of joking, like, so what do you think I'm going to change this time? And they will, if you know them and they know you, they will probably guess correctly. And then that's great.
I'll do that. I'm gonna ask some of the guys that I've worked with for a few years next time we check in and see what they say.
Yeah, it's like my goal as an educator is to lose clients, basically.
Yeah.
But so it doesn't really help. But there's always more people,
Sure, absolutely.
So another thing, the rest of these are kind of pretty short, I think.
Okay.
Don't program or coach hop. So, if you want to use a coach, that's totally cool. Stick with a program. That's just one thing that people constantly do. Like, they're not getting what they want, so they just program hop, every 4 weeks or whatever. You don't give something long enough to give it a chance to work.
Sure.
You can take 6 months on a program. Then you really know what happened.
Absolutely.
And this is maybe I don't get it because I'm an old dude, but I have the sense, and this is for me for sure, but I have the sense most of the time when I see people on their phones in the gym that it's a distraction for them, and if they literally, like, if they had to leave their phone in the car, they probably would have better workouts.
Yeah,
it takes them away from the moment. Literally, like, people are on their phones, and you have to, like, they're like obstacles. You have to walk around them because they're
yeah. Everywhere in life, that's that. You're trying to walk into a store, and somebody's walking ahead of you, only taking like tiny steps at a time. You're like, well, I'm just trying to get in the store.
So I think, some people like to log their stuff in their phone, and then in that case, think you can put things on airplane mode, and you can still use the apps. So you're not, because I get, like, I have my Apple Watch that I use to time, like, the rest intervals and those sorts of things.
Yes.
And I put that. I listen to music, but I don't respond to. And I get buzzes and stuff all the time. I don't look at them because if I do, sometimes it's like not something I want to see. I'm like, oh
yeah,
shit.
It takes you out. You start thinking about that, right?
Totally. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's an extreme, effortful, focused endeavor to weight train. To produce growth after you've been doing it for a long time. It's like you just can't sort of, like, it's not a walk in the park.
Yeah.
So you have to have some focus, and I think. Especially for someone who's kind of grown up and been symbiotic with their phone for years and years and years, they don't realize the extent to which it's taking away from the potential focus and drive they could be having in the gym.
That goes for other important areas of life too. Like if you're trying to spend one-on-one time with a significant other, you know what I mean? Like families that are going to have dinner together. There are periods where it makes sense to say, hey, let's put this down. For now, let's make a pact with one another that we are going to not look at our phones for the next hour or whatever, and make that pact with yourself when you're in the gym. I try not to. Yesterday I sent a text right before I went in the gym, and then I started listening to my music, and then the text came in, and I looked at it, and I responded, and I was still warming up. But I see, though, in that moment, it's one of those things where, okay, now I got to get back to my focus. I try now too, where I've gotten into a mistake. I was using YouTube for my music, and then I would get a playlist I liked, but if it wasn't something I liked, then I would switch it. And I really like listening to a particular kind of music, and I'll find a live set now that lasts at least an hour. So it's just one track and it's just a continuous thing. And it's by an artist that I already enjoy. So I can just let that play and I don't have to change anything. I can just shut the ringer off and just go do my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then re-engage after I'm done and doing cardio.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So there's the phone thing. And so they say I think the phrase is like, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or something like that.
This is a good one.
Yeah, really. So you can increase your average as a bodybuilder, so to speak, if this is something you tend to, by getting a badass training partner and training in a badass gym.
Yeah. Both of those things, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you go into the right gym and it's just like, you could be like, if you're going to a gym where there's no one watching or whatever, like your wrong environment or whatever, you just like have a, half-assed workout. Maybe you go in the right gym and everyone's getting after it. You can surprise yourself a lot of times.
Yeah. There's no question, man. And let's even look at the equipment. If I go into Crunch Fitness up the road for me where I have a membership, that's my fast gym. If I want to get in the gym and I want to get a quick workout in, I got to get back to do a show with Dave Crossland at 11 or whatever. I get my workout in up there. Dumbbells go to 130 pounds. Am I ever going to think about using the 150s if they don't even exist? When I trained in my parents' basement when I was a kid, I had 35-pound dumbbells and I could make 50-pound dumbbells, but they were hard to make and it took a lot of effort to put them together. So for me, I thought of the 35-pound dumbbells like at 13, 14 years old, those were the heavy dumbbells until I got in the gym. And then the 35 dumbbells, they were at the small end of the rack. And that rack just kept going and going and going. And if I go to a place like Royal Oak Gym, I think they go to I'm not even sure what they go to because I never use the high-end ones, but they're like 170, I think, something, maybe higher 185s, somewhere in there. And I tap out at like 150 is the most I ever can handle and not look stupid in the process.
Right.
But that said, having that equipment there, and like you said, man, having people to show you that you can do this, that a human being is capable of making this happen. If you surround yourself by people that are afraid to set off the lunk alarm, then you're never going to be able to do what elite level people do. I just don't think it's going to be, I shouldn't say never, but the probability of being able to do something so extreme isn't even going to enter your mind if you put yourself in the wrong environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's people, there's something you could say is kind of internally contradictory about this because you're turning off your phone, so you're like disconnected from the rest of the world, and you're in your own little zone. But at the same time, we're saying go into a gym where the area that you're in matters. So you're supposed to be connected with everyone around you.
Now you're making it complicated.
Yeah, I know. Like I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Go with it. Yeah.
But we are. That's part about being smart about this. We are tribal beings. We're hierarchical. We're social animals. So you can control that environment to a certain degree. You can turn off the phone, which probably isn't going to do much for you in the context of your training. I don't imagine you're going to. And maybe you have a phenomenal girlfriend, and she knows that you do allow text messages to come through, and she sends you a message that says turn it the fuck up this next set.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, like you get that message and it turns like that. Maybe that can happen. In that case, then leave your phone on so you can get those messages. But you get away from the negative and add in the positive. So that the positive would be a training partner who's stronger than you. I was asked a long time ago, by a guy who was one of my training partners for not very long time. He didn't like to do what things we were doing. He always found a way not to come in the gym, but I said my ideal training partner would be someone who would just make me his bitch every single day. And not in in the prison shower term, but basically like someone who's just stronger than I am, who's willing to go, who's just like an absolute animal. That's who you want. Yeah. Because they make you better,
Yeah. But somebody you can almost, I feel like there's a level of like, you can almost keep up with. I think that's reachable. You know what I mean? It's like, because I feel like, that it's important to have someone who's still a peer, someone who can be your peer, someone that you can stretch to reach toward. I never lifted as much as Shelby did when we trained on a lot of the bigger back movements, but I could stay within shooting distance of him on most stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I could kind of gauge how hard he was pushing too, and gauge his struggle to move up with things, and I could mimic that on my own end. I could keep up with him in that regard, not the actual sheer weight, but I was close,
Mm-hmm. I was like that with Dave
Okay.
Henry. We were pretty. I'd get him on some back stuff, but not all of it. He beat me on everything chest wise, and chest is weak for me.
Okay.
Shoulders were pretty close, I think, and legs I could usually get him by maybe a little bit.
Okay.
So we were always like within, like he's either like right behind me, right on my heels,
Yeah.
I'm kind of trying to come after him, and he's like the dangling carrot.
Yeah.
So that was there, and of course, Dave likes to train hard, so that was a good. So finding like that person who is appropriately motivating for you.
It's hard to find that, isn't it?
It'd be very difficult. A lot of guys train. Women are known to recover better, and they have better muscle endurance than men.
Yeah.
The research have kind of demonstrated this. They train, especially for legs. Women can just bury a lot of guys.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've experienced it.
Yeah. So finding a woman training partner who's willing to get after it with you can be a good way to do that, as long as it's not distracting.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah, distracting possibly. I never really found that to be the issue, but some people could be, and also and I've heard women talk about this. Some guys were like their ego gets so involved, like they start trying to do shit, and they're trying to, and she's like, I'm not impressed. Like I don't care that if you squat 800 or 1,000 or 500, whatever.
Right.
Like they're trying to alpha male their way into getting there to be impressed in some way, and that's not good.
Right.
So. But anyway, that was the main thing: is the gym and or the training partner, if at all possible.
That's a good point.
Gotta find that. Yeah,
that's a good point. And it's harder to find nowadays with a lot of the commercial gyms and us being encouraged not to try as hard, not to push as hard, limiting the weights, limiting the, it just even in a powerhouse gym, people have gotten kicked out for making too much noise, and it's a whole other podcast in itself, but. It definitely, I think environment plays a huge key role, especially today. I feel like you and I had been in the gym when it was a very different environment, even I would say a decade ago compared to now. And some people haven't even had that opportunity. So they don't even know what it's like to not train at an LA Fitness, for instance.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Another thing, and I hadn't mentioned this before, but one thing that I have had to do, and it's taken me years to get to this, but some people, it's about switching the mode, and it's totally up to the person. I'm not trying to give unsolicited advice, but
yeah,
I have people there are a lot of people who just like to talk in the gym.
Yeah,
in most gyms I've been to. If you go on the right side of time, you'll find there's that one guy who just literally, I don't know if they ever lift at all, they just have conversations.
Yeah.
It will flip you into conversations. And I've had to tell those folks, literally, I can't have a and it's like, I would love to talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm a fucking talker. Like, you'll get me rolling and I'll start talking about all sorts of shit.
Yeah.
I talk kind of professionally for a living.
Case in point, podcast.
Yeah, podcasting, but I can't do that right now. So you have to excuse me. I'm not going to be able to engage you. I'm going to put on my I'm an asshole look, and I may even look at you, and I may even look at you, while I'm focused on something else, and it's not. And I may have seen you, but I'm not going to be able to pull out from what I'm doing and say hello necessarily. It's not going to just. So once you've had that conversation, it's easy.
Yeah,
just an honest, weird thing to do, but super duper helpful because. I have a friend here in town, and she's a very, very sweet, wonderful woman, and there are lots of older guys who are just at the gym to kind of talk, and she's it doesn't bother her so much. She can get back into her zone, but she probably spends 10, 15 minutes at workout talking, which she'd rather not do ultimately.
Yeah.
But she just is too nice, and she's okay with it. But I know there are people who get roped into those conversations.
Yes.
And they do get frustrated by them.
Yeah.
And so you avoid that. It's totally okay to do that. Those people who are talkers like that, they will find someone else to reciprocate the conversation.
There you go. Absolutely.
It's like you toss them into an abyss of the twilight zone where there's no one around and they can't have any conversation with anybody.
Right.
Find someone to talk to. So, and the last thing was just think long haul. A lot of people are like, this relates back to goals. We're kind of coming around full circle, but so think about what is sustainable. So, if you're gonna go for it, for instance, with drugs, like some people do, whatever grams a week, is that something you plan on doing for the next 30, 40 years? Or you plan on just training for the next 5 years and seeing what you could do and then getting out? Some people do. But sort of think about that long haul, because if you really like the endeavor of training, you really like being fit and looking fit, then think about, what is something you can do and you maintain. So if I know so many people, I've even people said, you still squat? I'm like, I just squat on the SUCESS. Really? I haven't been able to squat for 15 years.
Wow.
And part of the reason for that is that I'm pretty much a knucklehead in the gym, but I've started avoiding the things that I know are chronically injurious.
Yeah.
And so think about, like, what can you sustain in the context of what are you going to get out of this? So if you're someone who's like, I can possibly get to the Olympia stage, and I'm going to have to push it. Like Craig Titus is someone, his other exploits aside, but he was renowned for someone who just pushed everything to the limit. And if he hadn't done what he ended up, whatever he did or didn't do that landed him in jail, he was at the top of the bodybuilding food chain. He was up there. He was making a living from that. And maybe that's all he needed to do. And then once he'd retire, if he hadn't ended up in jail, he could have, maintained his celebrity status and ridden that out for a career the rest of his lifetime. So for him, using extraordinary amounts of gear and pushing the limit in every way, shape, or form, that was going to create a long-term payoff. For someone else, that may create just fertility issues and make it difficult to conceive children down the road. Or training that way may make it such that you can't get out of bed without 5 minutes of stretching and 600 milligrams of Advil.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So think about those things in terms of, like, how do you want to be? This is a hard thing to do if you're 20 because you're indestructible. But think of, you want to be able to do this like John Meadows does.
Yeah.
Long training for that. I mean, I've been training almost 40 years now, getting up on like 39 years or something like that this year. Wow. And I'm so happy and blessed I can still do that. And it's because I've learned a little bit over time to, like, temper things. What can I still keep on doing? I can't keep, if I tried to do this for the next 5 years, I would have my rotator cuffs would no longer be in existence.
I think that's really smart advice, man. I think that is just because it is so easy to look at, like, looking at for shortcuts, looking at what can I do to achieve this goal short term. And, big thing in life, I think just in general, a lot of these points, I feel like they apply to so many other aspects of life, like just delaying the gratification, that you can have something that you can keep and that you can maintain long term. I think that there's going to be huge benefits to that, but you don't see that in 6 months. We put these videos, on YouTube now, and unfortunately, the videos that are going to be popular is how I gained 30 pounds in 20 days, stuff like that. Those are going to be the things that people want to see, and those are going to be the things that people want to believe in. The truth of the reality is that this is going to be, like you said, man, a long-term thing. And if you love it, if you want to keep it in your life, if you want this to be part of who you are, then I think that's a huge point, man. You got to look at exactly what you said. At how can you maintain this? Can you maintain what you're doing? It's good.
And some people may think, maybe they don't want to make it alone. Maybe they're going to see, what can I get out of bodybuilding? And if I don't get where I want to go, then I'm just not going to train anymore. Yeah. That's okay too. Sure. I think just sizing that up, what you're willing to do and how long you want to do it for is important, because you don't want to shortchange the future version of you by something you did now and by being short-sighted. Yeah. So I think James Hollingshead said, in one of his podcasts where he said, if I wasn't a pro by the time I was 30, then that would be it. He'd step back. Yeah. So he knew that. He's like, he gave himself a certain amount of time, and obviously he got there, and now he's doing well. But like that sort of thing, I think, is very mature, and so just sizing that up now makes sense. So you can think about, like, so whatever it took to get 30 pounds in 30 days, are you going to keep doing that? Like, or are you going to say, I'm going to try this once. I want to try to get. Dante's a great example too.
Okay.
Like Dante, got up above 300 pounds, and he pushed the limits pretty hard there for a while. But he knew that once he got that size, and he's demonstrated this now for at least a decade or so, he could bring things back down, go with sort of a maintenance training version of what he'd done previously, and he's still a big dude. And he's going to walk around. There's no one who's going to see him and say, that guy put his time, not say that guy didn't put his time in the gym. Because he's a monster. So he created that physique, and he made it out alive, in a very healthy way. He's a very health conscious guy, but he wanted to intentionally set himself up for having a big bodybuilder-esque physique.
Yeah.
For decades beyond his sort of ultimate growing time, knowing that you're not going to be pushing like that in your 50s and 60s.
Sure.
If your health is something you're concerned about. So just having that, and it's like figuring out what your parameters are. Not to say any set of parameters is better than the other, but if you want to keep doing it, then think about it. So,
right on. Well, guys, I hope you've appreciated these tips. This is good stuff. A lot of stuff that even the things that I have thought of, I really enjoy taking this time to think about them again and to reincorporate some of these areas into my life, because it's something I feel like my goal is to always be better right now, in everything I do, and that bodybuilding is important to me. I'm not going to be stepping on the Olympia stage. I'm not going to even be stepping on a pro stage. My goals would be if
Unless you're handing out trophies because you're a sponsor.
True, there's that possibility, but
think big.
But I still want to be the best at doing what I love, and I want to keep it in my life for a long time. So I appreciate these thoughts, Scott. Yeah,
definitely. I thought it'd be a nice way to just get this is maybe listen to it a couple times type podcast for some people.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of just basic stuff that people are missing, I think.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, for another episode of Muscle Minds with Dr. Scott Stevenson, you can go to byobbcoach.com to pick up the ebook version of Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. You can go to the Amazon affiliate link we have in the show notes if you want to buy the hard copy of that. We've also got the is it glycerol that we have from Amazon. I'm putting that in the show notes too. Yep, the glycerin. And we got a couple other things too.
Want to ask? I use about a 70 cc scoop, like a large protein scoop.
Yeah.
If you look at the plastic underside of those big scoops you get with True Nutrition, that says 70 cc's on there. I use about that much in my intro workout that I start drinking about 10-15 minutes before I get to the gym. That's what I use.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And the show is brought to you by True Nutrition. TrueNutrition.com. You can use our code ADVICES. And guys, we will see you next time. Thanks a lot, Scott.
You're welcome, man. Adios.